Hey guys, welcome back. It's time to explain Halo Infinite's story. Now, I've tried to make this video as short and concise as possible, but Halo Infinite's story is really big and it's full of tons of subtleties that I just needed to mention. So if I were you, I'd recommend going and making yourself a cup of tea because this is going to be a long one. So, Halo Infinite's story begins right as Halo 5's legendary ending ends. In roughly the December of 2559, which is a year after Halo 5's campaign, in the orbit of Installation 07, Zeta Halo, the UNSC Infinity is under assault by the Banished, a mercenary faction led by the ruthless brute Atriox. In short, the Banished were formed in 2549 by Atriox in opposition to the Covenant. He and his brutes grew tired of their kin being sent to die for the Prophets and no longer wanted to be ruled by spineless political entities, nor die for their false cause, and so they broke off from the Covenant and formed the Banished. Anyway, back to 2560, the UNSC desperately try and fend off the Banished invaders from humanity's flagship, but their forces prove too strong. Atriox confronts the Master Chief and, just like he did to Red Team on the Ark, dismantles him with ease, proving once again that Spartans are nothing more but men and women in armor. He throws Chief into the void, presumably killing him, and continues with the raid on the UNSC Infinity. We then skip forward 6 months later, and who we initially believed to be a UNSC pilot, codename Echo 216, Fernando Esparza, finds Chief floating in space among the wreckage of the Banished decisive victory. It later turns out that he's not a Pelican pilot, rather a volunteer civilian engineer who just wanted to help with the war effort but got scared and hid during the raid on the Infinity, and when he heard that Chief had fallen, stole a Pelican to try and survive. Fernando's hope was at rock bottom, but when he finds Chief, the savior of humanity, his hope is restored. To try and wake Chief up, he overrides the power cells in his Mjolnir to reactivate it. After his fight with Atriox, the Mjolnir automatically powered down and went into survival mode to try and ensure the survival of its wearer. But Fernando is successful and the armor powers back up, its BIOS restarts, and Chief awakes, once again, to a galaxy in disarray. As he tests the servos in his hand, he realizes he's grasping an AI chip, and when he inserts it into his helmet, his BIOS reads it as a weapon containment device, but notes that it's empty. After calibrating his suit's diagnostics, Chief discovers that in the 6 months since they lost, Zeta Halo has undergone some pretty significant damage, and that the Banished had reigned totally victorious against the UNSC. But before he has time to think, the Pelican is EMP'd by a stasis beam from the Banished warship Gbraakon, which is collecting debris from the naval conflict to fuel the Banished forges. So, as is protocol, Chief arms up and boards the warship. As he fights his way through, he finds out the Banished are preparing an invasion force beyond all comprehension to capture Zeta Halo. They're deploying power extractors, prefabs for bases, and a significant number of troops. Knowing he needs to get down to the Halo to stop them, he destroys the ship's coolant pipes, which seals its fate. As he's escaping the exploding warship, Escharum finds out what's going on and that Chief is still alive, which invigorates him for battle, something he's not felt in a long time. He also reveals that Atriox is dead and that the Banished seek to repair the Halo. He escapes the warship, is picked up by the pilot, and they begin their descent to Zeta Halo. Meanwhile, in the Banished command center, the House of Reckoning, Escharum orders ex-Silent Shadow Blade Master, the cybernetic elite Jaeger Erdomni, his closest friend and confidant, to stalk the Master Chief and relay any intel on the demon back to him. Back on the Pelican, Chief receives an encrypted message from an unknown source. The dropship's AI tracks the source of the message to the broken underbelly of Zeta Halo, and the two head there with haste. Chief disembarks and begins to plow through the enemy Banished resistance, but as he does so, he encounters echoes of Cortana, pieces of her data cycling on repeat until they run out of power, replaying her and also her maker Dr. Halsey's memories. When he reaches the source of the message, it turns out to be a gigantic room, a chamber, filled with silexes, tombs that the librarian used to safely store catalogue species from the effects of the halos so they could reseed the galaxy and allow life to continue after the halos were fired to stop the flood. In the center of the room, Chief finally recovers the source of the message, an AI named The Weapon, who had been stuck there for 6 months while he was out cold floating in space. The AI was a copy of Cortana created by Dr. Halsey, presumably using her leftover brain samples from the original creation of Cortana that Chief and Blue Team recovered from her lab in Castle Base during the events of Shadows of Reach. The weapon's purpose was to infiltrate Zeta Hilo and imitate the ring's security system, baiting Cortana into interfacing with her so she could then lock her down for retrieval, which would then allow Chief to take her back to the Infinity for deletion. Now, at some point, Chief plugged the weapon into Zeta Halo's systems prior to the Banished arriving, and she was able to lock Cortana down. However, she reveals that she was deleted, but not by her. Reason being, she had code built into her that would automatically carry out her deletion once Cortana was deleted, but clearly, that hasn't happened. She hops back in the weapon containment device and the two set off to the surface. As they do, they go through more echoes of Halsey talking about Chief being special, echoes of the Spartan 2 recruits, and then a flashback of when Chief received Cortana for the first time on Reach to test her, where Halsey tells him that she will sacrifice anything to ensure humanity's survival. This is an important detail for later on, remember it. The weapon finds a copy of fragments of the activation index in the trap that was built to ensnare Cortana, and the two head to the surface. As they get closer, they find the dead body of Spartan 4 Benita Stone, a recon specialist that was killed by a unique energy blade, that of Jaeger Adomni. And then they run into Tremonius, a banished lieutenant of whom Chief deals with rather quickly. When they reach the surface, they find a Silex once containing the Harbinger empty. The banished have freed her. Very ominous. They then capture Outpost Tremonius, which was a banished base in the ruins of the UNSC Reverie frigate, clearing a landing zone for Echo 216, who picks them up and flies them near to a friendly UNSC signal that they picked up. On the way, the weapon, who at this point has no idea she's a copy of Cortana, ponders what Cortana did that was so wrong and why the UNSC wanted her deleted, because she was never told, but Chief remains silent. With that awkward silence in the rear view, the two continue their mission. They capture Forward Operating Base Gulf, which is one of the many now Banished-controlled UNSC FOBs on the ring, rescue some Marines, and begin re-establishing a UNSC presence on Zeta Hilo. Following the friendly UNSC signal, they eventually reach the Tower, an interrogation facility run by Chaklock, a wise yet vicious elite. Inside the tower, they find Spartan 4 Hudson Griffin's Mark 7 Mjolnir, which was forcibly removed from him while he was still alive. At the top, they find Griffin, locked in a torture device. Chief kills Chaklock and frees Griffin, who tells John the Banished are excavating a foreigner facility known as the Conservatory, before dying in his arms. When he eventually gets to the excavation site, he deactivates the excavation beam that has been modified to tear through foreigner metal, kills Bassus, a brute chieftain tasked with guarding the site, and begins his descent into the Conservatory. On their way down, they encounter the body of Spartan 4 Vedrina Makovich, killed once again by Jaeger's blade, and then run into Monitor 117649 Despondent Pyre, the Monitor of Installation 07, stumbling over her words, talking about the Harbinger's return and how it's odd because her exile was supposed to be absolute. Then, the Skimmers come out of nowhere and start trying to grab a hold of her. She tells them she will not give up the location of the Endless, and then falls to the bottom of the room. Chief and the weapon hurry down to her, and as they do, the Harbinger starts talking to them, saying the Endless are blameless, and that the Foreigners set this in motion. When they reach Pyre, they find nothing but her carcass. A rather interesting flashback then happens between Cortana and Pyre. Roughly 6 months prior, she came to Pyre to get her to give up their location. Now, at first, Pyre thinks that Cortana wants to free the Flood, but then she reveals that there are worse secrets on Zeta Hilo than the Flood. The Endless, or as Pyre refers to them as, the Punished, that cannot be freed. On their way out of the Conservatory, they find the corpse of Spartan Theodore Sorel, special weapons expert who was killed by proficient brutes, presumably Hyperius and Tavares, the Spartan killer brothers. And then, when they reach the surface, they finally encounter the Harbinger in her flesh. She tells them that they, the Endless, or the Zalanin, as they're known by their species name, are not the enemy. She reveals that she took Despondent Pyre's Encephalon containing all the information and access data needed to get the Endless, and proclaims that the Reclaimers are not the future. The Foreigners' lies are at an end, She is the harbinger of the truth, and the Endless will be found and will ascend. She then activates the spires, beginning what she calls the Reformation. So these spires basically create materials that allow a halo to repair itself without being taken to the Ark. However, I'd presume that this process is far slower and less efficient than going to the Ark, and the Reformation is her way of basically just saying repairing the halo. After a short and rather decisive fight with the Harbinger, Chief and the weapon infiltrate the spire. As they ascend the gravity lift, the weapon notes that the process locking the spire down isn't banished in origin, it's sturdier. The spire was also deployed using a protocol older than anything she'd seen, and it knows they're there. When they arrive in the spire, Adjutant Resolution, Zeta Healer's submonitor, reveals himself, and it turns out the Reformation requires a sequence to be set for it to begin. On the spire's observation platform, Chief has the weapon shut down the spire to stop the Reformation, but seeing as this directly violates the submonitor's protocol to protect and repair the halo, he turns on Chief, entering a massive Sentinel husk and attempting to kill him. Of course, Chief beats him, destroying the Sentinel body rather easily as, in Resolution's words, it wasn't built for combat, and proceeds to put the weapon into the spire systems and shut it down. It turns out there are in fact more spires, many more spires on the halo, inactive and waiting for the initialization sequence, and the Harbinger is flooding the network to try and start it, but is meeting resistance. The weapon then infiltrates the network to try and stop it, but the Harbinger stops her, and the spire begins to shut down, literally. So, like a brick, Chief flies pretty good out of the spire and into the back of the pilot's Pelican. The weapon isolates which spire the Harbinger's attack on her came from, and they set a course for it, but on the way are shot down by a series of banished anti-aircraft cannons. So Chief sets out to destroy them while the pilot searches the wreckage of a battle that they crashed beside for a working slipspace drive with hopes of being able to return home to see his family. As Chief takes out each AA cannon, Escharum taunts him through holograms about how easy the UNSC were to defeat. He reveals the Auditorium, where the Endless are stored, is already under their control, and that the Banished and the Harbinger share the same goal: repairing Zeta Halo and freeing the Endless. In a bet to demoralize Chief, he tells him that Laconia Station, which is where the Spartan 4s, including Buck, Mickey and Romeo trained, and that housed 50 plus Spartan 4s, along with a number of other staff, was destroyed by its AI, Leonidas, under the orders of Cortana and her created. He then formally reveals the Hand of Atriox, a group of the best, the cruelest, and the most efficient killers in the universe, of whom he taught to be better, and that they were coming for him. As Chief makes his way to the third tower, Escharum dispatches the Spartan killer brothers of the Hand of Atriox, Hyperius and Tavares, to eliminate the Spartan. But of course, after a tough fight, both Jiralhanae fall to the demon. When the coast is clear, the pilot emerges from his hiding place beneath the bay of a wreckage Pelican and, in a fit of hysteria and desperation, reveals the truth about who he is. Chief consoles him, saying that everybody, including him, fails. It's a natural human trait, everyone makes mistakes. He failed by not protecting Cortana, presumably from the Didact, the event that led everyone and everything to this point in time. If he had stopped the Didact before he could vaporize her AI chip, then maybe he would have been able to get her back to Halsey in time to repair her, and maybe the Created would have never happened, and the war on Zeta Halo would have occurred totally differently. He proclaims that he failed her, but he will not fail the pilot. The two get up and gear up for their next mission, to breach the Command Spire and stop the Reformation. We then get another look at the Banished side of the conflict, where the Harbinger berates Escharum about his forces failing to stop the demon, and they're losing control of the ring. She also notes how there's something connected to the installation helping Chief. Something vulnerable, but intelligent. This is referring to the weapon. Escharum then orders vast reinforcements to the Command Spire that controls the Reformation, and orders Jaeger to hunt down the Master Chief and bring him in, alive. Back to the Allies' POV, they reach the Command Spire, but the Harbinger has reconstructed the sequence needed to access it, which denies them entry. So they plan to use the pulse emitted from beam towers nearby, of which connects to a ring-wide communications network, to reconstruct a pure version of this sequence. They go from tower to tower, interfacing with the towers to begin this reconstruction, but when the weapon connects to the towers, she begins noticing oddities. At the first tower, she says that it feels like someone is watching her when she connects to it, and at the third tower, something pushes back against her intrusion and scans her. She suspects at first that it's some sort of security protocol, but when they get to the fourth and final tower, she realizes it's a trap set by the Harbinger to try and use her routines combined with Despondent Pyre's to break the deadlock and start the Spires. Now, because this revelation means that the weapon could potentially be used by the Harbinger to accelerate her plans, Chief secretly activates his Mjolnir's AI countermeasure routine, just in case she gets a hold of her. The passphrase is Red Flag, referring to Operation Red Flag, which was a highly secretive planned operation during the Human Covenant War to use Reach as bait to bring in Covenant ships so the Spartan 2s could capture them, use them to find High Charity, go there, kidnap a prophet, and use it as leverage in truce negotiations with the Covenant. It never happened, but it was a pretty major deal during the final days of the war. Regardless, the sequence is now rebuilt and the two head back to the Command Spire and access the structure beneath it, named the Nexus. As they delve deeper into the Nexus, they pass through more of Cortana's data echoes, one of which recites a poem named Waking by lauded British poet Aldous Huxley, of whom was heavily involved with the concept of philosophical mysticism, and I don't think I need to go into much detail as to how the concept of mysticism ties into Cortana. When they reach the center of the Nexus, they see all the other spires on the ring, and counting, and discover the Command Spire acts almost as a spire control center. Chief reveals to the weapon that he still doesn't trust her after what happened with Cortana. As he searches for power seeds to repower the lift into the Command Spire, he discovers more data echoes, this time of Captain Jacob Keyes, the captain of the UNSC Pillar of Autumn that encountered the first Halo, along with also more Cortana echoes, reciting quotes from Halo 3's Cortana moments, and also a holographic replaying of the pair's final goodbye from the end of Halo 4. When he plugs the weapon into the Nexus, the Harbinger gets control of her again and begins to torture her as she talks about the Endless's return. Believing her to be compromised, Chief's activation of his Mjolnir's counter-intrusion measures at the beam tower are vindicated, and he hurriedly begins her deletion routine, the passwords for which are rather sad. Again, we have Red Flag, followed by 034 and Samuel, the first Spartan 2 to ever fall in battle, of whom died saving John, an event that had a profound effect on him and thoroughly changed him as a soldier, as a Spartan, and a person. If it weren't for the death of Samuel 034, Chief would not be who he is today. However, the weapon actually overrides this deletion routine, which makes Chief furious for obvious reasons, and only validates his distrust of her. She does reveal that she managed to steal the Monitor's Encephalon back from the Harbinger, but still, cancelling her deletion routine was extremely risky and should not have been done. And it then turns out that the risk wasn't worth it. As they ascend the Command Spire, the Harbinger reveals that she's already done what she needed to do with the Encephalon. The Spires are now active, however, the Reformation isn't being carried out ring-wide, it's not repairing the entire Halo. Rather, it's being focused entirely on one specific location, the Silent Auditorium, a location of which all the records and purpose are missing. Now, this connects to the novel Point of Light released earlier this year, where Ryan Forge discovers a similar fact about the Zeta Halo. There are parts of the Halo's timeline that are missing from the archives. There's something on the Halo that the Foreigners wanted to hide. Anyway, the two continue to ascend the Command Spire, encountering once again and defeating once again Adjutant Resolution, before deactivating all the Spires. It seems as if they're victorious, and after another argument about trust issues, the pilot arrives to pick the two up, but as he does, Jaeger appears behind him in the cockpit, smashing the controls with his blade and capturing him. The weapon urgently opens a portal to where he's being taken, and the two jump through. We then briefly switch back to a Banished perspective, where Escharum berates the Harbinger about her Reformation plans failing, but she reveals the Auditorium is partly rebuilt and should be good to go for what they need it for. Jaeger then reveals to Escharum that he has successfully captured the pilot to be used as bait for the demon. We then switch back to Chief, who, while passing through the portal, passes through a large data cluster, giving him a flashback to when Halsey first told Keyes about Cortana and her plans to use her own brain as the basis for her. And can I just say, this is the Pete Stacker voicing Keyes again. The Pete Stacker. Wow. Halsey goes on to say that Cortana will do anything to ensure the mission is accomplished, including sacrificing you or herself. Another echo then plays of Cortana reciting her speech from the end of Halo 5 about the Creator's rule of the galaxy and what will happen to any species who disobey her. When they leave the portal, they end up at a location called the Repository, beneath a massive banished structure. Chief receives a holographic message from Escharum of the pilot being tortured, where the war chief berates him for his humanity, saying that it makes him weak and he promises to continue the torture of the pilot unless Chief stands before him. Embedded within the message were the coordinates of the pilot's location, and so the two begin their ascent to the surface. As they do, they hear more Cortana echoes, one of which says, "I'm with you," right before the Silent Auditorium is revealed, and they see the banished forces mobilizing on its position, indicating its importance. The next data echo reveals the AI, Leonidas, of Laconia Station that Escharum mentioned earlier, confirming his allegiance with Cortana and her created, and nuking the station, killing everyone on board. Then, more memories from previous games, this time memories of the messages that Chief received from Cortana in Halo 3 when she was being tortured by the Gravemind. As they repower the gravlifts to reach the surface, a hologram of Earth appears, revealing that Cortana threatened Lord Hood at the beginning of her uprising, ordering that he and the Earth's government stand down against the Created. It turns out, as expected, that they didn't, and in retaliation, the Created led an assault on the UNSC headquarters in Sydney, HiCom Bravo 6, wiping it out and causing the Allies to go into hiding to survive. We then get a glimpse at her first negotiations with Atriox, in which she attempts to force the Banished to stand down, but in defiance, Atriox refuses. So, to show him what's at stake, she uses her Guardians to destroy Doizak, the brute homeworld. Cortana just made another enemy. Chief once again blames himself for this, and for everything, as he thinks that he could have reasoned with her and talked her down, but the weapon starts to suspect that she's missing something, and when she clicks her fingers, it clicks. She's Cortana, or at least an exact copy of her. Chief states his mission was and still is to ensure that she doesn't do what Cortana did, but crushed from the revelation, she reactivates the deletion protocol and waits for the end. But Chief refuses. He won't lose Cortana again. He still doesn't trust her, but he wants to. When they reach the surface, they find themselves before the House of Reckoning. They plow through the Banished resistance and enter the daunting tower. Within, the Banished have built makeshift UNSC bases to train against UNSC soldiers, explaining how they were so efficient against them. Escharum reveals that Doizak's destruction only strengthened the Banished's resolve. He speaks of the siege of Pelagnar, where one settlement held out against his forces for 19 days, which contrasts quite strongly with humanity's supposed supership, the hope of the species, the UNSC Infinity, which lasted a mere 4 minutes against the Banished assault. Chief then makes it to the final room, littered with supplies, and at the centre of which is a piece of UNSC wreckage with a data unit playing a message from the pilot's family. He picks it up, falling for the trap set by the Blade Master, Jaeger Udomnai. But Chief defeats him, then moves upstairs where he finds the pilot. He proceeds to defeat Escharum, free the pilot, and then holds Escharum in his arms as he dies. Regardless of their differences, of what he'd done to humanity, at the end of the day, he and the War Chief were both warriors, fighting for their people. The pilot doesn't get it, but Chief does. They then depart for their final destination, the Silent Auditorium. The Silent Auditorium was a courtroom, a prison, and a place of execution where the Foreigners would decide the fate of an entity or a species. As they proceed through the auditorium, they encounter yet more echoes of Cortana. Just like in Halo 3, she says that she has seen Chief's future, and it turns out it was here where the weapon locked Cortana down, and it was also here where she died. When Cortana was here originally, she'd received a visitor. She thought that it was Chief who was coming to discuss the terms of surrender of the UNSC, but she was mistaken. It was Atriox. When she saw the Banished arrive, she didn't think for a second that they'd beat the Infinity and, more so, the Chief, but she was wrong. Atriox had come down to discuss her terms of surrender. The one thing that could stop an alien faction from gaining control of the Halo, the Master Chief, was gone. She'd positioned the Banished perfectly to take control of the Halo and have a gun pointed at the head of the universe. Atriox at some point found out about Zeta Halo, its history, how it's different, and wanted the secrets that it hid. He wanted the Endless, who was stored somewhere in the Silent Auditorium, of which Cortana had control of. She knew that she could not give them up to him because, as she herself had said, they are worse than the Flood, and would be used against humanity. As they progress further through the facility, the weapon notes how the memories seem to be getting more deliberate, as if they're less like echoes and memories and rather more like actual messages from Cortana to Chief trying to tell him something. Once again, Adjutant Resolution appears, but this time, he realizes he was wrong all along in attempting to stop Chief from preventing the Reformation. He says that thing must not be released, that we need to stop the Harbinger, and we need to stop the Endless. As they ascend an elevator, echoes show Cortana being regretful for what she did to Chief, the damage she inflicted on him. As they get closer to their final destination within the auditorium, the two encounter one of the final echoes from Cortana, her final interaction with Atriox. She asks him if he would change his past, to which he states no, he would not change anything. This solidifies her choice. She shatters Zeta Halo, sacrificing herself in the process, but denying the Banished its power, while also preventing the weapon's deletion so Chief would have a version of Cortana to enable him to protect humanity in the years that followed, all in an attempt to right the wrongs of her uprising. And then, their final battle begins. They reach what appears to be something of a courtroom, where the Harbinger is found. She has found the Endless. She starts opening a connection between the auditorium and somewhere else on the Halo, and the connection is sentient and is searching for something. It frequently finds something, then switches, and the weapon detects something else in the Halo that's trying to help her stop it. Now, this, I believe, is offensive bias. More on this tomorrow in my legendary ending breakdown. Once the Harbinger is defeated, she speaks, not to Chief, but I think to Atriox, saying, "You have what you need. Tell them I'm sorry it took so long." This, of course, connects to the post-credit scene in which Atriox uses a key to unlock the Endless Containment Facility, freeing their Silexes. However, the weapon notes that the signal sending her message is old. Really old. As she dies, her final words to Chief are that her time is ended. As is his, the Endless will make sure they will return. The final Cortana echo then appears, a message she recorded for him to say goodbye. She admits to Chief that she was wrong, and that her plans couldn't be done alone. They were always meant to be a team, perfectly matched, perfectly perfect. Her final moments were spent ensuring that he and the weapon learn from her mistakes. And then, Cortana fades away, forever. The auditorium begins to collapse, and with no escape, a portal opens. Now, again, I'm pretty sure that is courtesy of offensive bias. They jump through the portal and somehow, 3 days later, end up on the opposite side of the ring in a desert surrounded by ancient rings. Despite the foreboding nature of how the Harbinger spoke of the Endless, neither Chief nor the weapon are scared of them. The pilot picks them up, he reveals that the Banished still occupy most of the ring, followed by his name, Fernando Esparza. The weapon then deliberates her own name, and she thinks that she's come up with a good one. The Halo 2 finale theme starts playing, your boy starts tearing up, and the credits roll.
Get ready.
However, post-credits we see Atriox freeing the Endless. And that's Halo Infinite, at least the main story. Tomorrow I'm going to have my legendary ending breakdown and theory video up, so link in the description if you're watching this video after that one has released. So, I want to give a massive thank you to all of you for watching. I really do appreciate it, especially if you got this far. Sorry this video was so long, but I wanted to make sure that I covered everything that I could. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't done already, and if you want, leave a like or whatever down below to show some support. I don't really mind, can if you want, don't have to though. And yeah, thank you all once again for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you all in the next one.